Welcome to Manchester. My name is Brian McCarthy. I'm part of the materials team with the KTN, and I'm delighted to welcome you to our applicant briefing event. We're here to talk about smart, sustainable plastic packaging. And I'm going to begin, if I may, with just some housekeeping. So if you need the toilets, it's back towards the lift. We're not expecting a fire alarm. So if the fire alarm does go off, then just follow me. The coffee will be served outside. Lunch is back towards the reception on this floor. And again, just follow us, you'll find it. The first basic slide is the agenda. So you'll see we have a couple of presentations this morning. We'll break for coffee just before 12. This afternoon, there will be people around to help you talk about the topic for today. And you'll see on the display board, there's some possibility of signing up to talk to my colleagues. But we're looking really towards a fairly exciting day. I'd like to begin the event by introducing David Blanchard, who is part of the SSPP Program Management Board. So David, if I may I introduce you?
Thank you. So good morning, everybody. As introduced, my name is David Blanchard. I'm the chair of the advisory group for this, the Industry Strategy Challenge Fund Smart Sustainable Packaging Programme. So the ISCF SSPP. I hope we've all got that. We're going to commit that to memory, write it down. If everyone's got that, that's excellent. It's my pleasure to welcome you today to this competition briefing for feasibility studies and enabling research. So you may well be asking the advisory group, what is that? Well, the advisory group are a group of people from academia, from industry, from government, from NGOs, all of whom have an interest, of course, in smart, sustainable plastics packaging. It's our role to advise to the programme board for smart, sustainable plastic packaging on the projects that should be funded in terms of how the government should be spending the money it's made available for smart packaging programmes. So the advisory board advises the programme board on how to spend their money. And so as the chair of the advisory board, that's why I'm here today, of course, to try to ensure that I understand the kind of programmes, the kind of projects that people are interested in, so we can ensure that the money is being spent what we think is in the best way possible. Now, 2 years ago, when the government announced the Industry Challenge Fund, I was the Chief R&D Officer for Unilever. And at that time, of course, many companies were making many commitments around plastic packaging. Of course, Unilever made its own commitment by saying that by 2025, all of our plastic packaging will be fully reusable, recyclable or compostable. And many of the companies then joined in that. A huge ambition, which at the time, many years ago, we had no idea how to achieve that ambition. Since then, others have made further commitments, some to halve the amount of virgin resin that they're using as part of their programme, others, for example, to ensure that they collect as much plastic out of the environment as they put into the environment. And I tell you that those are commitments where people have made the statements, but they don't yet have the solutions in terms of how they'll meet those commitments in that kind of time frame. When I retired from Unilever in April of this year, I then became involved as the chair of the advisory group because I was then asked to lead the team to articulate the degree to which industry wanted to engage with this area of sustainable packaging programme. And the specific ask was to obtain commitments of 149 million from industry to match the £60 million available from the government. The basic ask was, if you can demonstrate that industry will commit 149 million, we, the government, will release 60 million of funding towards the smart, sustainable plastic packaging project. And that's a commitment which we actually achieved. In fact, we overachieved that commitment, I think, recognising the degree to which the industry saw this issue of sustainable packaging as a huge business objective. Now, many of us understand that plastic packaging is important to many industries, and it's certainly, of course, important to the packaged goods industry where I played a part. It's a cost-effective, it's a safe, it's a durable material. It allows products to be shipped from factories to warehouses, warehouses to stores, from stores to consumers. It allows products to be kept safely, either in bathrooms or in kitchens, in people's homes. It's a safe, it's a durable material. But of course, as we all know, that durability is also an issue, because we now know that too much of that packaging then leaks out into the environment. The recycling rates continue to remain very, very low. And of course, packaging waste is now one of the big consumer issues that many consumer and NGOs will then begin to talk about. And so the question that we have as a packaging industry is, how do we ensure that packaging remains in the economy and stays out of the environment? And of course, that's then the reason for this packaging project. Now, I mentioned that the government has 60 million euros of funding which is being made available to this programme. And it's really being put towards a number of different themes. So one tranche is being put towards demonstrator projects. So these are more sort of the large-scale feasibility programs, more already sort of closer to the marketplace, where people believe they have solutions which they want to actually bring as market-ready solutions, but the economics would benefit from support from government funding. But another tranche is towards feasibility and enabling research to tackle problems where we don't yet have solutions. You know, how do we engineer better solutions across the whole supply chain? How do we dramatically increase the availability of food-grade recycled plastics? How do we measure the net impact of bio-based plastics? Just some examples, and I'm sure we'll talk about many of those examples today. So those are the type of questions we want to begin to address, and to talk in more detail about the project and how we'll spend the rest of the day. Let me hand over to Paul Davison, who will then now talk us through the rest of the programme. Over to you, Paul. Thank you.
Thank you, David, and good morning, everybody. I should start off by saying, firstly, this is week 1.5 of me in the job. So if this isn't quite as polished as you've come to expect from Nick and everybody else, then my apologies. I'd also like to give Gav a big thanks for developing the programme as far as we've got so far. It's in great shape, and I really appreciate the effort that he's put into that, and the team as well. So just first, a very quick word about UKRI, for those of you who are not familiar with it. Is essentially when the research councils were brought together under a single umbrella. What I would say is, please just think of us as UKRI. Unless you're very familiar and academic from the research councils, please don't worry. It's just UKRI. That's the key part. UKRI is the way the government delivers its funding, either for research and innovation, either through universities or into industry for strategic research areas. This is a nice graphic. It's a couple of Sankey diagrams on waste flows, and I just wanted to spend one moment on looking at the small part of this. Which is this part, which I think came from the Ellen MacArthur reports. And from someone who's worked in plastics all my professional life, this is a shocker. So a third of plastics packaging globally is what you might call fugitive. It's leaking into the environment. It doesn't even make it into a landfill. And the idea that that's been going on for as long as we've had plastics packaging, to me is a shock, but almost to the point of being quite shameful, as someone who comes from that industry. So, and I'm actually really pleased that you'll see in the objectives for this fund is a dramatic reduction in the amount of plastics entering the environment. So that's kind of a really, really important point, because that clearly is not acceptable. That cannot continue. The large Sankey here is actually showing either research themes or points of intervention along the supply chain where you can see sensible interventions can be made. But please bear in mind that 30% going to the environment. That's not right. That can't go on. I think our aim, and this is kind of one of those aims you quite often see, which is saying, look, right, the UK can be a leader in terms of research and innovation in plastic space. Actually, the UK is, I would say, extremely well placed to achieve that. And the reason I say that is because we have a confluence of three factors. Firstly, we have a very active university and research base to work from. Secondly, the UK has always had a very active and viable plastics packaging industry. Some of the leading companies in Europe are all based in the UK or have very significant presences in the UK. So it's one of those industries where the UK is very, very well placed. The third reason I would suggest is we have Sir David Attenborough, and he's almost uniquely driven this up the agenda. And it's really important that we have the public saying, we have to do something. Government has listened to that and said, yes, you're right, we have to do something. We want to support that with funding and other initiatives such as the reform in EPR, the DRS, and also the potential for the plastics packaging tax. So all those things are pushing the UK in this direction. And I would suggest we're probably 6 to 9 months ahead of our European counterparts in terms of particularly that public perception. My previous role, I spent a lot of time in the Netherlands, and you could see it was getting there, it was coming up the agenda, but the UK was the first. One of the pieces of evidence for that is the UK Plastics Pact. We're now seeing those pacts being developed in other countries, but UK was the first. No question about that. So we are certainly ahead of that. The slide on the left kind of really shows the thing that's, I think, in most people's minds in terms of particularly plastics in the ocean. I would like to remind us, I think we have two sets of issues with plastics. Yes, we have the fugitive plastic issue. We also have the CO2 issue. And we kind of end up trying to sort of summarize this and say, look, it's almost choosing between turtles and polar bears. You know, the turtles with the plastics in the ocean, polar bears losing the ice from the CO2 perspective. Plastics and the solutions will have a role in both of those areas. We put the UK Plastics Pact on the target there. It's not just to demonstrate it is there, but it's actually those targets are part of what we wish to achieve here. So funding applications should show how they will help achieve those Plastics Pact targets. And if you remember rightly, it's the elimination of problematic or unnecessary packaging, 100% recyclable, 70% collection, I beg your pardon, and 30% recycled content. So you can see that's the kind of drive. I would also like to just flag a point here to say that this is not just about technology fixes. I think the social science part is going to become increasingly important in this area as well. How do we get behavioural change? How do we stop people littering? How do we get people to feel confident about their recycling choices? A number of people say to me, I don't recycle, I don't know which bin to put it in. We should have got past that by now. This is not a new problem, right? But yet here we are. So please think beyond just the technology stuff. That social stuff and the economics behind that are going to be really, really important. As David touched on, the programme is broadly in 3 areas. So we have a core programme, which is really fundamental to how we actually run this programme. Give us some options to other things. I'll talk about that in a minute. We have the enabling research, which is kind of like where we would see very much the academic-led stuff, and hopefully, what I'd love to see is a couple of like moonshot stuff. They kind of say, what if that kind of out there? This is what the future could look like. That's where that sits. Then we have the R&D demonstrator, which is the collaborative R&D. So we'd expect that to be industry and academic partnership, and also the large-scale demonstrators sits in there as well. So under the core programme, we have firstly the funding for the UK Circular Plastics Network. If you haven't, and I can't imagine there's anyone in this room who hasn't, but just in case, if you haven't, please sign up. If I don't say that, Sally's going to shoot me. So please, it's a great opportunity. We'll be probably expanding that in due course as well. So please sign up for that. And as also part of that core funding is the work we're doing like today. That will come out of our core funding activity as well. So I mentioned the enabling research is where we want to see the moonshot stuff, the kind of the thing where we can go, yes, we can move beyond. How are we going to do the system change? And a couple of examples here. One is like, actually, how do these materials behave in composting? We all assume they're compostable. Oh, Really? In your garden, composting, does that work? Which is why I think the work that Mark Miodovnik is doing on this should yield some really interesting results. I mean, it's also it's that citizen science approach as well. Very nice. Perhaps on the other extreme, looking at enzymolysis of polymers, we can find that we can do it with PET. And it's slightly disturbing that this bacteria have actually evolved specifically to feed on PET, which is kind of an interesting, the power of evolution. But it's also, how do we extend that? How can we speed that up to being a commercially viable rate? All challenging questions, all where we'd like to see sort of the enabling research type activity. Then we can move into the collaborative R&D, and this is really giving a sense of the spread of the work. So we can go all the way from feasibility, so it's about Internet of Things. It's kind of like, you know, the fridge telling you that, yes, this has gone out of date, all the way through to, and I think the middle slide is actually some work I did a little while ago on how do we get food-grade polypropylene. We can do food-grade PET, we can do food-grade polyethylene. There's a lot of polypropylene used in packaging, and we don't have good routes to get that back into packaging yet. So how can we do that? There are some significant technical but also legislative barriers and regulatory barriers, and they need to be considered as well. The new business models, again, this is something it's easy to overlook, but it's kind of, this is the Waitrose Unpacked projects, where you can say, okay, how do we do that? Now, in terms of getting products out of packs on shelf, technically you think that's not that challenging. But then you've got some really difficult questions around, you can say, safety and security, but also, and I would say probably very, very high at the list, would be brand integrity, brand value. You know, how can you have, because don't forget, brands earn their money from selling more than just standard bran flakes. It's Kellogg's bran flakes. And how do you retain that value if it's not in the box or if it's not in the pack? Which is a really, really interesting question. And I foresee that as being one of the largest economic barriers to the adoption of this type of approach. So we need to have a bit of a think about how we can do that. Then we have process design. There's a chemical recycling plant there. There are a number of competing technologies in this space. I think it's a very, very important part of the recycling solution. It won't be a silver bullet. We will not be able to chemically recycle everything. From an environmental perspective, it doesn't make sense, and from an economic perspective, it doesn't make sense. However, for those slightly more difficult but very efficient packaging formats, say flexible packaging films in particular, it's a really attractive route. Right, just to give you a sense of the funding and also the eligibility. So the overall, so the large-scale demonstrators. So this is where the large bulk of the commitment is. So for round one, the total budget's around 12 million. We are making 25% of the eligible costs available. And you can see that that's the type of the size of the project we're looking for. Up to 3 years, everything has to be finished by the end of the SSPP. It's got to be collaborative. Please don't just go on your own. It's these types of projects that would be very difficult to do on your own anyway. It's already open. So if you haven't looked already, if you're interested in the larger scale stuff, please have a look on the website or come and talk to us about that afterwards. Closing date is the 19th of February. So please, you know, come and talk to us if you've had that on your mind. The proposal side, this is if you've got the germ of an idea for a large scale demonstrator, but you haven't really got it in a position ready to submit. And the idea here is to make a small amount of money to help get that ready. And I see Nick the Ranger. Thank you very much. And there you can apply either a single company or as a research organisation as well. The idea is that it's very short term. So it's really to give you the resource to pull your ideas together to get them ready to submit for round two. Okay? And I think that's it. So I'll hand over to Nick. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, David. Good morning, everybody. Take a moment to reflect on turtles versus polar bears, could be the greatest YouTube channel ever. I would watch it. So today we're here specifically to launch the third competition, the third business-led competition that is part of the SSPP programme. And this is a competition specifically for feasibility studies and industrial research. I'm going to talk for about 10, maybe 15 minutes max to tell you a little bit about the parameters, the types of projects that we want to see entered for consideration in this competition. And then I'm going to hand over to my colleague from our operations team, Sharon, who will go through much more of the nuts and bolts of physically how our application process works. So thank you very much to sort of Paul and David for setting the scene about why this area is important. I'm sure that sitting out there in everyone's heads are some really good, interesting and exciting project ideas. And though this might be the slightly duller part of the presentation, in some respects it's almost the more important, because nothing is more frustrating to us as a funding body where good ideas fail because their applications are not submitted correctly, errors are made, mistakes are made. I cannot stress enough the importance of getting the application right, because a bad application is a difficult thing to come back from, no matter how good the idea. We do as much as we can, but we are constrained by proper process. So the first and most important thing to consider when you are framing your project and how you present that project in your proposal is to make sure that you tell us exactly how your idea meets the scope of the competition. So for SSPP, and this is a common scope across all the different mechanisms, your project should aim to help contribute to making the plastics packaging supply chain more circular. Your project should aim to help the UK meet and deliver the targets of the UK Plastics Pact. One of the reasons that many of the ISCF challenge programmes, the UKRI funding programmes, and there are many, from subjects as diverse as the future of aerospace to electric vehicles to transforming food production, most of those challenges have adopted specific, smart, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, targeted, particular targets. We didn't develop our own targets for the SSPP programme because the UK Plastics Pact, another example of where the UK is leading in this field, one of the first country, in fact the first country to adopt one of the EMF Pact approaches, is that there were targets sitting there ready for us to adopt and trying to avoid confusion. So your project really must be showing how it would deliver the targets of the Pact. And we want you to tell us how you are improving on the current state of the art of plastic packaging. This isn't about reinventing stuff. We are still at heart responsible for overall innovation. This is about new stuff, bringing new products and services to market. So as long as you can fit and tell us how you fit within, your project fits within that scope, that's the first hurdle crossed. Specifically within your proposal, because bear in mind that you answer a load of questions, it generates a text file, that goes into our assessment process. So the information that you share with us is shared in confidence with a number of external assessors as well as internally for us to read through, consider and judge. That's it. We don't phone you up and ask for points of clarification. Every bit of information we need to make a decision about whether or not to fund that project has to be contained within the information that you submit. So it's really important that within your proposal, you show how your project directly supports the objectives of the Pact and can deliver systemic-wide change, and clearly explain how you would reduce the overall carbon footprint, environmental impact of the UK's plastic packaging chain. And we've created, for those of you that have applied for Innovate funding before, many of the questions that you see in the application form will be familiar, but there will be two brand new ones. They just happen to be question 3 and question 4 that specifically interrogate systemic change and achieving Pact targets and environmental impact. So we're asking a bit more of you because we need to be certain that all of these investments are contributing to those overall benefits. So I suspect Many of the people in the room will be familiar with the PAC targets, but just briefly touch upon them. Your project needs to explain how you, or how it would contribute, whether it's a product, whether it's a material, whether it's a service, whether it's a technology. It should, in some way, shape or form, you should be able to make the argument that it would help the UK contribute to one or more of 100% of plastic packaging to be reusable, recyclable or compostable, 70% of plastic packaging to be effectively recycled or composted, how it might contribute to the UK achieving 30% average recycled content across all plastic packaging, or it should be in the sort of one of the broader targets, I suppose, how it would allow the UK to take actions to eliminate problematic or unnecessary single-use packaging items through a variety of different ways that you could approach that. The scope, as I said, it's very broad, but we're roughly expecting most projects to fit into one of 4 categories. And this next section is just by way of examples of some of the things that we might be looking at considering. We did discuss a lot in the early stages of the challenge whether or not we would identify what we called highlight themes. So sometimes in our competitions you'll see a line that says we are particularly interested in funding projects in ... We haven't gone down that route with this challenge. But what these are some of the areas where we think there's opportunity. So certainly we're expecting to see materials innovation. So the image there, which many of you might recognise, are Oohos, or Ohos, depending on your pronunciation, a company called Nopla now. So that's an edible, or at least if you don't want to eat it, and I have eaten it, and it's kind of okay. Don't, by the way, eat a whole ketchup one. That's really weird. They do cocktail ones, which are much nicer. But, you know, that could be new, more recyclable polymer materials. It might be work in biopolymers. Materials innovation, we believe, would also include approaches such as compatibilization, where you're aiming to make the polymer used to create packaging easier to include in a secondary life, or make it easier to, rather than sort of putting it into polymer, approaches that facilitate that increasing the recycled, or the use of recycled material whilst not compromising the performance. We'd certainly consider alternatives to plastics for packaging applications, but we would expect, I think, those to be novel materials. You know, you get approaches where, say, I could use cardboard to make a yogurt pot. I've trapped myself in a really bad example. Because you could, you'd have to line it, but you know, novel sort of mixes of current materials, you know, they're harder to demonstrate that that's innovative. But you know, some really new and interesting materials out there that might help get plastic where it should be, in particular where plastic is the only current option. So materials innovation. Design innovation. So we're expecting, and again, the example there is reusable tampon applicator that was developed. The product's called Dame. That concept design potentially displaces large numbers of single-use disposable polymer tampon applicators. But what sort of design projects might we be expecting? Certainly, first and foremost, we really expect there's a lot still to do in design for recyclability. A growing field is around design for reuse. At some levels, reuse approaches are quite simple. You can take your Tupperware to Morrison's and they'll fill it up with olives. Be careful, because quite a lot of olives and they're quite expensive if you pick the wrong piece of Tupperware. But there are other elements around design for reuse. You know, things like refill systems, nozzles. How do you do it cleanly? How do you do it effectively? How do you guarantee product safety, security, so on and so forth? Making food delivery and other delivery packaging more recyclable. Lots of work there to do on design. It's a personal sort of area that I'm very interested in. I don't go to supermarkets anymore. I buy bits and pieces from a sort of a little local grocers and a butchers and things like that. But the majority of my day-to-day consumables, and that's both foods and household products, is delivered once a week by someone in a van. So I don't pick products off shelves anymore, and I've noticed that the packaging is starting to change. My apples come in a bubble wrap plastic bag rather than a plain plastic bag. Not in of itself the greatest example of picking something that's more recyclable, but it is that opportunity to change packaging where the consumer will never have to pick it off a shelf and make it more recyclable. And then you've got the whole raft of things like the smart marking and identification technologies that might help extend product life, better stock management, all those sorts of elements in the design innovation. Technology innovation. This is where we anticipate quite a large number of projects. All sorts of technologies. Could be, something like reuse processes, speed cleaning, ensuring that reusable containers are fit for purpose. It might be related to collection, to hit that better collection targets. It could, and there are definitely projects out there, sorting and separation. Technology innovation, there's still improvements that can be made to mechanical recycling. Chemical recycling has already been mentioned. That feels like kind of the next big step for recycling. But equally, we don't want to forget about the challenges around compostable or biodegradable packaging formats. One of the main challenges there is that the infrastructure just doesn't accept them. Why is that, and what could we do to make those categories of materials more widely accepted and get them into the stream? Because remember, that pack target is effectively recycled or composted. Not compostable, effectively composted or digested, I guess. The picture there is an early stage project. It's just a graphical representation, but that's an improved near-infrared camera system that should allow much better sorting at speed of plastic so it can be effectively recycled. Possibly even capability to identify positively black plastics. A lot of work's gone into making plastic not black because NIR cameras couldn't see them. And as is always the way with innovation agencies, someone sooner or later comes along and says, you know what, I maybe could make near-infrared cameras. Never mind. It's ever-moving feast. But last and by no means least, business model innovation. So reusable packaging systems, zero packaging business models, consumer or behavioural change. What can we innovate there, again, to help deliver those pack targets? There's always a slide which may or may not upset some people sitting in the room. Some things, and not many, but some things we have ruled out of scope. If your idea or project or technology relates to these three elements, you are out of scope for this competition. It doesn't mean that you're out of scope for Innovate funding as a whole. We have many other funding opportunities, including an always open smart funding, and it just might be that that's the competition for you to look at. So we're not funding a project projects which do not have plastic packaging as the primary focus. So if you're working on something and you're very obviously working in, let's say, the automotive plastics market, don't try to put a project in that bolts on and says, oh, you could also do pots, tubs and trays with this. If it's obviously targeted at automotive plastics, you will be out of scope. So look at the smart funding. Projects which encourage or facilitate the export of plastic packaging whilst it's still classified as waste. This is about making sure that we are taking responsibility as a nation, as a national block for our plastic waste. So if there is a project that was very heavily predicated on still exporting plastic whilst it was classified as waste, you would find yourselves out of scope for this challenge programme. Again, smart funding potentially. And lastly, if your project uses or manufactures either a liquid or a solid fuel, then you're out. Again, there are certainly approaches. There are some really low-grade, super mixed, super dirty plastic waste streams where realistically fuel is probably going to be the only option for quite some time, or at least not without substantive change. But that's not the focus of this programme. And again, broken record, but think about smart. It's worth making sure that your application goes into the right project. So here are the project criteria for this particular call. We're looking for projects between 30,000 and 100,000, and that's total project cost. The maximum grant is 40% of eligible project cost. That is lower than our normal intervention rates for these earlier stage projects. The reason for this is because we have been set, as have all the other challenge programs under the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund, very stretching targets for driving increased and enhanced private sector investment into R&D. This overall goal to achieve 2.4% of GDP being spent on research and innovation. I stand before you saying, I know that this will be hard. This is harder than normal. These are not our usual match funding rates. During the competition briefing, we do want to reiterate that this is 40% at a project value. So if you're familiar, you'll know that typically for these early stage projects, an SME might be able to recover 70% of their costs. A large company might be able to recover 50% of their costs if you were collaborating or individually. 40% is at project value. So if you did come up with a £100,000 project, and as ever I remark sort of slightly humorously, it's amazing how many feasibility study projects cost £99,998. You can still have a grant of up to 40,000. How you distribute that amongst the partners is up to you within the standard state aid boundaries. So it is possible for an SME to get more than 40% of their costs as long as it's still brought in within that 40% overall threshold, and all the partners obviously in a collaborative project agree. Now, we have got a worked example in the finance section. It's a bit of a thing to sort of get you noggin around. Please do ask. You can always contact us with a possible budget breakdown, and we will say, yep, that meets the criteria. Start date, so we're looking for projects to start by August 2020. The project duration is up to 12 months. They can be a single business, and it's single business of any size. So you don't have to be an SME. If you are, if there's someone in the room, you know, from Coca-Cola or Unilever or something like that, and you want to do a feasibility study, you can. I'd much prefer it if you would collaborate with an SME, because we like SMEs, but there it is. And categories of research, there are definitions of these on our website. Can be feasibility study or industrial research. So feasibility study is mostly kind of people, understood. Generally speaking, a feasibility study is a piece of work that prepares you for more work. The output of a feasibility study is really a sort of an agreement, a plan, an idea, a way to press ahead with an idea. So it does involve some research, some tinkering. It can also involve, just discussions with partners and so on and so forth. Industrial research is the sort of the classic planned research or critical investigation towards the development, improvement of a product, a process, a service, or a technology. That's where I anticipate most of the applications are likely to come from. That's, can I come up with something new? Can I test it? And generally speaking, industrial research would certainly go up to sort of prototype type stage, trying to test something, kick the tires a bit, so on and so forth. Okay, so I'm going to finish now just by talking very briefly about that question 3 and question 4. Because these are the new things. This is the thing that we anticipate this is the biggest change apart from the sort of the intervention rates. So, first thing to note, question 3 scores 5 extra marks, and question 4, than the other questions, which is a way of pointing out that the more you understand, the more you can tell us about how your project will meet the PAC targets and the environmental impact, the greater your overall score will be. So what we're asking is for you to tell us, taking a systems perspective, how your project will change the plastic packaging system and deliver on the PAC targets. There's quite a big piece of supporting information which you'll find on the tabs on the online system. Please do go and read it. Some of the definitions there, that text is designed to help you. So, you need to tell us which bits of the supply chain you're working with, what ways in which would it deliver systemic change, and how will you deliver against one or more of the PAC targets. But please note that bottom line in yellow, if it is delivered at scale. So we're happy for you to sort of come out, obviously if you come up with something amazing, we definitely want, and the application will test, how realistic your route to market is, how likely we think you are that you've demonstrated your ability to actually sell this, because the best idea in the world can just sit on a shelf and no one do anything with it. But we're allowing some leeway. So if your idea works and it is widely adopted, how would it help deliver the PAC targets? On environmental impact, note again, out of 15. So when it comes to environmental impact, again, we're asking you to take a systems perspective, but what we want to know is really what will your project do that's positive from a perspective of environmental impact? How will it reduce environmental impact? But also, don't try to hide potential negative environmental impacts. You know, the energy cost of making a very robust, reusable piece of packaging is almost certainly going to be higher than making a single-use piece of packaging. But it's a trade-off. So how many times might you use that reusable piece of packaging? You know, is it 108 times you have to use a cotton bag before it's better than a plastic bag? Don't know. People will tell you. So what are the trade-offs? We're asking you to take a life cycle approach, consider additives and other chemicals, glues, inks, and so on and so forth, if they're involved in the project. But there's kind of 4 points, really, 4.5 points that you want to cover. And I do recognise that it's a lot of questions to ask. So how will your project prevent or reduce plastic packaging escaping into the environment? Tell us a little bit about the carbon footprint, where it compares to the current state of the art. Are there any consequences of human exposure to anything that you're doing? That might be particularly important if you're developing a new material or developing an additive-based or a compatibilization-based approach. What are the consequences to human exposure? And then the second part of that is, and what are the consequences to everything else, such as fish, marine mammals, birds, turtles, or polar bears? Will it make them stronger? And lastly, again, it's a sort of wild card, any environmental impacts that have not been covered by those above specific categories. And lastly, and quite specifically, if your material is of biological origin, we would like you to give some illustration or indication that you've considered impacts on land use. Always and an important question when you are considering any biological feedstock. Where are you going to get the carbon, the hydrogen? Is it coming from crops? Do you need to plant more crops? Or is it coming from food waste? And how dependent is it on food waste? Some idea that you know, we get a lot of projects that say, we'll just make it from biomaterials. Okay, but where are they coming from? So there you go. If you have a life cycle analysis, you can submit it. You don't, pardon me, you don't have to submit it. It's not a requirement to have an LCA for this competition. Okay, so that's me. So I will now pass the baton to my colleague Sharon, who's going to talk to you about the much more of the nitty-gritty about how the process works and how you actually need to communicate all your answers to us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Nick. My name's Sharon McHugh, so I work for the competitions team at Innovate UK. I don't have anything as exciting as polar bears and turtles to talk to you about, but I will talk to you about the eligibility criteria, how you actually apply on the Innovation Funding Service, and then I'll talk to you a little bit about the assessment process. So just before we get on to eligibility, you are allowed to use resubmissions for this competition. So if you have entered other competitions, it's applicable. You could apply to this one with a resubmission. And that's an application that Innovate UK judges as not materially different from one that you've submitted before. I won't spend too long on this because Nick has already gone through it, but to lead a project or work alone, the lead must be a registered UK business of any size. You must carry out your project work in the UK and exploit the results from and in the UK. To collaborate, you need to be a UK registered business, academic organisation, charity, public sector or RTO, and you do need to be invited in to the competition by the lead applicant. As Nick said, project costs are between 30 and 100k. They last up to 12 months and need to start by August 20 and end by September 21. So these are just the types of organisations that we fund: businesses, research organisations, public sector organisations. There are more in-depth EU definitions. You will have access to these slides and there will be a link that will take you to those EU definitions. So Innovate UK is offering funding for this competition under the General Block Exemption Regulation. We are unable to grant funding to any limited liability companies meeting the condition known as undertakings in difficulty. So this test only applies to companies that are 3 or more years old. When you're submitting an application, you need to certify that you are eligible for state aid. If you're unsure, you should seek legal advice. We've also got a lot of information on our website, so please do refer to it. So this competition is running under Article 25, so it covers feasibility studies and industrial research. And this slide just gives you an indication of the type of activities that this does cover. So the aim of our state aid scheme is to optimise the level of funding to businesses, and we also want to recognise the importance of the research base to a project. As Nick said, the maximum level that research organisations can claim is 30%. So that's whether there's 1, 2 or 3 organisations in your consortium, it's only 30%. So if you are working in a collaborative project, at least two organisations need to be claiming grant, including the lead, and we would expect you to explain in your application the structure and rationale for the collaboration. So any one business can lead on 1 application and collaborate in a further 2. If a business isn't leading on an application, they can collaborate in 3. Research and technology organisations or academic institutions, they can collaborate in any number. Just bear in mind that if you do have a final outstanding claim and or independent accountant report or a live Innovate UK project, you would not be eligible to apply for grant funding. And if you've previously been awarded a grant and you haven't made a substantial effort to exploit that award, again, we would not look to award you funding. So these are really the key dates. The competition opened on the 13th of January. We're obviously here today for the briefing event. Deadline for submission is the 1st of April 2020, so that will be at noon. So please do make sure that you submit your applications then. The innovation service will close at 12 o'clock noon, and you won't be able to submit after that. And then we are looking to be able to inform applicants on the 15th of May. So on to the Innovation Funding Service. So if you are interested in any of our competitions, if you go to IFS, you can do a keyword search. So that will bring up all relevant competitions. If you click on the title, it will take you to a tabbed view of that competition. So you'll be able to see information around scope, eligibility criteria, how you apply. So when you're happy, you simply click on the green button to start your application. So to apply for a competition, the lead applicant will need to create an account. If you've already applied for other funding, you can simply log in using your user details. We do recommend that businesses use Companies House to search for their organisation to populate details. When we're doing our viability checks, it does help to speed up the process. For research organisations, academics and universities, we do suggest that they input their information manually. It just makes sure that they are classified correctly and that they receive the right funding. So in terms of the application form, this is the type of information that we will be looking for from you. So information around the application team, who you're collaborating with, your project title, timescales, your research category and innovation area, a short summary of your project and the objectives, what's innovative about it, and then a public description. And this is the description that we would use if you were successful. And finally, you need to explain how your project aligns with the scope of the competition. So these are the application questions. So there are 12 questions. Please note that you can submit appendices for questions 1, 2, 4, 9, 10 and 12. There is very detailed guidance on IFS, so when you are responding to the questions, please do refer to that guidance for the type of information that we're looking for from you. So in terms of application finances, your business doesn't have to be UK registered with Companies House when you apply, but it must be registered before you can receive funding. You're unable to claim funding if you're an overseas organisation, your organisation is set up as a branch, or it is based in Jersey. So for labour costs, you will need to enter the role within the project, the gross annual salary, and the number of days that that individual will be working on the project. IFS will then automatically calculate the total for you. If an employee is part-time, you should enter their costs as full-time equivalent. So please note that ineligible costs include dividends, bonuses, and non-productive time. So in terms of overheads, Innovate UK's definition is additional costs and operational expenses incurred directly as a result of the project. So that might include administrative staff, general IT, rent and utilities. So we class indirect overheads as those costs associated with back office functions, so usually that's finance or HR. They can only claim a proportion of their time, and their work needs to be in addition to BAU. So it needs to be additional and directly attributable to delivery of the project. On that slide, you'll also see further examples of direct overheads, including IT infrastructure, laptop provision not covered by capital usage. So for material costs, you will need to enter and describe what materials you intend to use on the project, the volume and the cost. The materials listed must be project specific, and you need to provide as much information as possible. So if you simply put consumables at 50k, that wouldn't be enough information, and if you were successful, our project finance team would ask for further information around that. So for capital usage, you'll need to describe how you're using the equipment, whether it is new or existing, the new purchase cost, how long you are depreciating it over, and these calculations need to be in line with your accounting practices. So for subcontractors, you're perfectly entitled to use subcontractors, but we do ask you to justify why you are using them, especially if they're not UK based. So please do make sure that you explain that in your application. If you're subcontracting to a parent or sister company, please ensure that you list at cost and do not include profit. So for travel and subsistence, here you include things such as essential meetings that you need to go to for the project. You do need to break them down, so break them down in terms of travel, accommodation, subsistence, and travel should always be at economy level. So for anything else that you've got that hasn't fitted into any other headings, you can put it under other costs. Just make sure that you're not double counting in doing so. So an example we've got here is maybe patent filing for intellectual property. So just as previously mentioned, the level of funding awarded does depend on the size and type of organisation you are, and IFS helps to calculate that based on the information that you enter into it. So this slide just gives you an example of the organisations and the level of funding that you can receive for feasibility and industrial research. So as Nick said earlier, this is an example for the plastics competition, which we're talking about today. So funding is capped at 40%. So you can see in this example, we've got total project costs of 89k. You can claim up to 40% of that, so that's 35,600. And then you can see the breakdown of how that may work at the bottom. So the partners can claim up to 35,600. So it may be that even if you're a small business and you could claim up to that 70%, to keep within the 40%, you will need to adjust the percentage in IFS to bring that down, and you need to agree that if you're collaborating, you would need to agree the percentages with your partners. Again, if you do have any questions around that, please do email into our customer support services and we will be able to help you. If you have academic partners, they will need to complete a JES form. They should all be familiar with this. That system automates the collection of full economic costs and tells them the numbers that they need to use to put into IFS. Innovate UK doesn't have access to the JES system, which is why we asked them to complete it separately and then upload it as a PDF. So the academic partners will need to enter their TSB reference. They should all be aware of what this is, and then they need to make sure that the figure that they enter into IFS matches that on the JES form. They also then need to upload it with countersource status to IFS as a PDF. Academic partners also need to explain the justification of resources and pathway to impact. If there are any queries on the JES system, there's an email and help number available on the slide. In terms of submitting your application, you will see a summary of the project costs, so all the organisations in the consortium will be able to see this. Again, please make sure that your total project costs align with the eligibility criteria of the competition. So again, total costs need to be between 30 and 100k. If you're in a consortium, IFS will highlight to the lead any partners who have outstanding finance figures to input. Until this is completed, you will not be able to submit your application. And again, just a reminder, the research organisation participation is 30%. And I should say, as part of our eligibility checks, we will check that the amount that you're claiming as a grant is 40% and that the research organisation is 30%. So please do submit your application as early as you can. So this slide demonstrates activity for another competition up until the close date. You can see a lot of people do leave it to the last minute. It does mean that if you experience any difficulties and you can't submit on time, we won't be able to submit it after the deadline. So please don't leave it till the last minute. So on to assessment. So all applications are assessed by independent assessors drawn from industry and academia. So they're looking for clear and concise answers, the right amount of information, quantified and justified, and a proposal that presents a viable opportunity for growth, a level of innovation that necessitates public sector investment and has the right team and approach. Again, please refer to IFS and the detailed guidance it gives you for each question when you're answering. You want to keep your assessors engaged because they might be reading lots of applications, so make sure that yours stands out. So if you go through to the assessment phase, whether you're successful or not, you will get feedback. That feedback is compiled using the comments from the independent assessors. It is intended to be constructive in nature, and it will give you highlight both strong and weak areas of your application. Please do bear in mind that because applications are assessed by a number of assessors, you might receive feedback that you think is conflicting, but that reflects their interpretations of the proposal that you've submitted. We do review the scores and feedback for our assessors just to make sure that they are adhering to our guidelines and that they are scoring fairly. In some cases where we think that a score is unjustified, we may remove that as an outlier. I'll go on to that in a little while. If outliers are removed, they are not reflected in the score that you might see on IFS because that decision is taken outside of the system. So this is an excerpt from a panel sheet. So this is generated once all the assessments have been completed. So the first column will shows you the score for a particular application. And the highlighted column shows you the score spread, so the difference between the highest and lowest score. And then the next two columns are out of scope and not recommended for funding. So if 3 or more assessors tick those last two columns, we would review the application, its feedback and its score, and if it's justified, the application would not be eligible for funding. So this is an example of an individual panel sheet. So the green box highlights a particular assessor score for an application. The purple box is a set of scores for a particular question, and then we would look for outliers. So the red box you can see highlighted with a score of 62. We might consider that an outlier because the next highest score is 87. So in those instances, we would look at the score, we would look at the feedback. If it's justified, we would leave that in. If it's not justified, that would be removed and your score would be recalculated based on the remaining 4 assessors. So once the assessment process is completed, you will be able to see feedback. So the lead applicant will be notified and then they can go in onto IFS and look at the detailed feedback. So if you are successful, there are 8 steps to project setup. Some information we require within 30 days, such as a project manager, finance contact information. Projects should start within 90 days or funding may be withdrawn. Confirmation of a bank account is required just to ensure that we're paying the correct organisation, and you may be asked for a redacted bank statement just to confirm this. So all grant claiming project partners are required to complete project setup. So to avoid delays, you should consider who the project manager is going to be, who the finance contact for each consortium member will be, and if applicable, how your consortium is going to be set up. And just leading on to that, in terms of collaboration agreements, it's always worth thinking about these early. So who's in the consortium, what are the aims, how is work divided up, ownership of intellectual property rights, etc. So if you are successful, grants are claimable quarterly in arrears. Claims can only be made for costs incurred and paid between the project start and end dates, and they may be subject to independent auditing. You will be assigned a monitoring officer, and they will be your main point of contact throughout the project. So please note that we're not able to process any project change requests before the grant offer letter is issued. If a member of your collaboration fails the UID test and is unable to resolve it, you would be advised to withdraw. And that's it for me. Thank you very much.
Right. So, thank you, Sharon. So we have now an opportunity for some questions and answers. I think that Veronica will be running around with a microphone. Brian, there's another microphone here. The reason that we're going to sort of reiterate the microphone is you might have noticed the cameras in the back. So we are recording this, so other people who couldn't make it here today can benefit from our collective wisdom and your insightful questions to point out the gaps and the holes in what we told you today. So please do fire away and we'll do our best to answer them.
Hiya, it's Martin Hyde from Comply Direct. I just had a question on chemical recycling, because you mentioned in your presentation specifically that anything that's using liquid fuel or producing liquid fuel would be out of scope. Well, my understanding is that currently, for accreditation purposes, chemical recycling, unless there's a really clear pathway to it going into product, which is packaging at the end, is considered a recovery process. And so the main product that's produced is a liquid fuel of sorts. So would any applicants that are going for chemical recycling need to be really specific about how they can prove that everything they're producing within the scope of the project is going into packaging material? Is that something you'd be looking for, or does that mean that in a way chemical recycling is both, I guess, in and out of scope?
So it is. We would be looking to fund projects where you were not seeking to produce liquid fuel fractions. Totally recognise what you're saying, plus the accreditation. To some extent, that's not relevant to our decision-making process. You know, what we're looking to do is see chemical recycling where they're really trying to push the value up and really trying to deliver that more circular outcome for the molecules, if you like. It's effectively what we're looking for is an improvement and a more circular molecular stewardship, to borrow a phrase from a guy called Keith Freegard. He's very keen on his molecular stewardship. Does that cover it? Yeah. Oh, here we go.
Hi Nick, it's Charles from HD Wall. A project which I've been looking at, the IPs in this country, the researchers in this country, but they will produce the packaging abroad where the food is being packed. rather than shipping stuff out there. Is that still going to fall within your scope?
So what we would want to see is the work being undertaken in the UK, the majority of it. Certainly, grant can only be given to UK registered entities, with the exception of subcontractors. So, but that's not, you shouldn't, I would expect and anticipate that we and our assessors would catch you trying to pretend that a partner is a subcontractor to flow money out. But equally, we would recognise that this is a global market opportunity. So exploitation of the IP, if it's the intellectual property is owned and licensed by a UK entity, I wouldn't anticipate that being a negative, impacting negatively on your overall assessment score. I have to wait for the mic. I forgot, but everyone's been doing it, but please do say who you are and where you're from.
So my question is about the finances. Yeah, is that you have?
We did meet in the lift, so it's okay.
So
please.
Okay,
please go,
so
go.
I have. You have another call, which deadline is for the 19th of February.
Yep.
And then the question was how much was because there you say eligible costs are between 25,000 to 50,000. This is what you expect. And then you say there that SMEs would be funded 70%,
Yep.
but you didn't mention anything about the 40% number that was mentioned after in this call. So I'm assuming you will fund, there is no, this limit of the 40% is not valid for this particular call.
So if I've followed correctly, as Paul mentioned, we opened 2 competitions on the 9th of December. That was a large late-stage commercial demonstrator projects, which are late-stage experimental development. There's up to the maximum grant you could get in that project is £12 million at 25% match rate, meaning to get 12, your total project side would have to be 48 million. So there the grant cap is 25% of the project cost. Simultaneously, we launched a Feasibility Studies competition, and that's the state aid definition, and that was particularly existed for people who wanted to come together and develop a detailed proposal, an application, if you will, for later stages of demonstrator funding. So that's specifically because we recognise that coming up with a plan for a potentially £48 million project takes a bit of time, takes a bit of effort, and particularly if you're an SME wanting to scale a technology. So that's why that feasibility studies round is there. And because that's not a particularly large chunk of our overall budget, we took the decision to offer that at the standard full match fund rates. So that competition alone within SSPP, if you're an SME, you can get 70% of your costs. For all the other interventions, we're at lower than the state aid's maxima for the project overall. I'm going to go, if it's all right with you, Sharon, let me whiz back. If I can find it. So it's worth maybe revisiting this. So what this is meant to be, this is what we mean by this project cap. If you've got an £89,000 project cost, where that adds up to at 40%, you can have the maximum grant we can give you is £35,600. But if you're a micro or a small business, state aid allows you to have up to 70% of your project costs. So in theory, in a normal state of affairs, the SME's grant would be 19,600. That's what they would be anticipating. Partner B, a large company, 50% of project costs they can claim, 15,500. Partner C, a medium-sized enterprise, 60% of project costs. So under business as usual, they would have expected 10,800. And the RTO, a university, a catapult, 12, full cost 12. But add that up and it's significantly more than £35,600. So you can't have your maximum grants. But it's up to you, by negotiation, how you break that down within the state aid rules. So one possible breakdown, and obviously I just picked the one that hopefully was the simplest to grasp. If that SME really needed its maximum grant, it could have 19,600. Particularly if the large company said, you know what, I'm going to cover this from my own R&D budget completely. My participation in this, I'll cover the cost. I don't need necessarily the funding. I'm happy with my share of the IP or whatever the collaboration agreement delivers. So they take 0 grant. But their contribution of 31,000 still helps you meet that overall project cost. Maybe partner C takes a bit of a hit. Maybe they just want 4,000. Maybe they're happy to cover labour and they just kind of want some materials covered, that sort of thing. And then on that breakdown, and I really hope I've got that adding up right, because that slide, the research organisation can still have their full cost. So those are the grants, and it meets that 40% cap. So that's a way that you can break the cost down. So that's specific to this call opening today, and likely for subsequent R&D funding that we'll do in this space. But to come back to your original question, sir, for that one little feasibility studies call, which is very specific, it's just about developing a proposal for demonstrator funding opening later in the year, we've just gone for the normal state aid cap. If that's not clear, and I appreciate it might not be, I've no idea how I can do it differently, but I'm happy to talk to you, or one of the team are happy to talk to you during a break, something like that. Okay.
Hi Nick, Rob Elias, Biocomposite Centre.
Hi.
Quick question on alternative materials. You mentioned some mycelium, for example, mushroom waste, things like that. Quick question then on pulp and paper. Those are conventional materials, but we believe they could be used to replace plastics, but to do that need lots of improvements around barrier performance and how easily they could enter back into the recycled stream after we've improved their barrier performance. Are those in scope or out of scope?
So I would say novel barrier materials, yeah. As long as they're being, what you'll have to make sure though is that you can construct, your proposition, if you like, has to be how the widespread adoption of packaging that is enabled by that barrier material helps meet the pack targets. So that could well be around, facilitates it going into the compostable route or the digestion route. But all recycling, yeah. But again, we'd want to see that consideration at a whole systems perspective. So, I'm sure everyone in the room is well aware of the fact that, and even some of the sort of campaigning groups are saying, everyone's rushed out and said, oh, it's great, I've got compostable forks made of this, that and the other. And it's like, well, nobody actually composts it, nobody wants it. That's the kind of whole systems approach that we need you to be explaining how your project meets. But yeah, in that instance, I would say that kind of R&D, would fit within the scope. Just when I thought I was out.
Hello, I'm Christian from Tilda. I'm the rice company. Sorry. I don't have a specific question about this. It's more like we have a problem. So we have pouches, microwavable pouches, and those have 3 layers. So I would actually need someone who can help us to make it compostable or whatever solution we have, or chemical breakdown afterwards. If there's something in the room to collaborate. So
Veronica, who's going to talk after coffee, we'll talk a little bit about the sort of opportunities to stand up and look for partners, but also the KTN, which Veronica will introduce, can actively help you identify people that are working in that area or interested in working in that area. So there's support available for that sort of thing. And in fact, looking around now, I don't know, I'm aware, I can say that we see several projects that do relate to how you can either change the nature of pouch construction, or shift it into alternate materials, or even starting to see ones that are actively trying to disassemble pouches during an overall recycling process. So, you know, I'm sure we can make some links.
Mike Shaver, University of Manchester. So just looking at this budget, right, we have lofty goals in terms of how we're going to save the world and stuff, right?
Yeah.
And I guess it's difficult for me to imagine doing that with 100,000 quid.
Yeah.
So are there follow-on industrial research type programs that are company led that will be for things that are more ambitious than you can accomplish at this funding level?
There absolutely will. If you're keeping you've got a back of a non-polymer lined cigarette packet. What's a vaping box? I don't know what are we going to do when there aren't fag packets anymore? I don't know. Post-it notes. If you're keeping a running total, we've got 50 million overall to spend on business-led R&D. We committed up to 12 with the Demonstrator Round. We committed up to 700,000 for the Demonstrator Feasibility Study proposal writings, and we've committed up to 1 million today. So where does that put us? 13.7, leaving a substantial amount, 36 whatever. I don't know. But yeah, some of that will definitely be earmarked for demonstrator projects, more demonstrator projects, and some of that will be earmarked for more of the sort of classic collaborative R&D, bigger projects, longer projects. I'm not, there's a reason there's nothing on a slide is because it is all subject to change until those competition details are published. But I would not be surprised, which would be me surprising myself, if we weren't looking at, you know, projects up to 2-3 years, up to £2+ million project value. There will be the opportunity for bigger projects. One of the reasons for doing this sooner rather than later is short, sharp feasibility studies now are the only real projects that have any chance of, depending on how our spend profile runs, we might end up offering, R&D funds being available, towards the end of next year. In which case, it is feasible that a project that gets funding under this, there might be earmarked follow-up funding. But equally, one of the reasons for doing this now is that there are always open mechanisms, and there's nothing like a healthy crop of interesting mid-stage projects coming out of a competition like this when we go back to Treasury and say, please, Chancellor, can I have some more in the future?
Hi, Alex Forrest from Eunomia Research and Consulting. So we're delivering technically into the UK plastics pacts. We're not a partner or a technical consultant. Delivering some of their priorities, some of which is looking at trials. So some of the stuff that has been discussed here this morning sort of comes under that. And I just wondered, in terms of eligibility, whether there's any sort of correlation or any cross-check as to what the plastic pact might be funding around sort of piloting and trials in terms of meeting or qualifying for this. So in a sense, not duplicating work that's already been undertaken elsewhere.
Yeah, so we are in an ongoing, constant dialogue with our colleagues at RAP, who are the primary delivery body for the pact. And we will be taking every effort to ensure that our respective activities are, I try not to use this word, but synergistic. We definitely want to be avoiding duplication of effort insofar as it's possible, and actually hopeful that we can continue with quite a productive relationship. With a previous investment, the Plastics Research and Innovation Funds, which commenced in 2018, we actually provided some funding to RAP, which they use to run competitions. So yeah, we'd certainly be looking for alignment, and we are actively talking to them.
Thank you.
For what it's worth, this project doesn't really cover large-scale trials. You know, like I said, under industrial research, you can get to prototypes. You can maybe try something somewhere out in the real world, but by the time you get to really trialing stuff at scale, or not even at scale, even at that sort of interim step, by definition, you're hitting experimental development, which is, again, different grant funding rates, different rules, blah, 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 blah. But as answered earlier, funding for that is to come. And, you know, we know some of the people that PACT have been talking to are actively looking at the demonstrator call that's also open, where you absolutely could trial stuff at scale in the real world.
Right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for staying after the coffee break, and hopefully you stay longer as well. So my name is Veronica Sanchez. I am the Knowledge Transfer Manager for Circularity and Smart Functional Materials at the Knowledge Transfer Network. The first thing I would like to say is apologies to those who tried to contact me to support some of the smart applications and didn't hear from me. I've been told that my email address is bouncing back for some of you. So here in the slides, you do have the correct email address. If you have any problems and you don't hear from me within 48 hours, that's very unlike me. So please get in touch with Sally or Brian and just report your problem to them. I obviously will go back to our IT team. It hasn't been said before, but the slides will be circulated sometime next week, and the video recording is, I think, will be likely to be publicized as well. So you've heard this morning quite a lot about the competition, what is it about? The input there. What I want to do in the next 20 minutes is just to talk you through the support that we, KTN, offer you to apply specifically for this challenge. Anyone not familiar with the KTN? I won't put you in the spot. So yes, I'm gonna very quickly talk you through it. So KTN, where do we fit with this maze of organizations supporting the plastic innovation? So as it was mentioned this morning, funding for R&D and innovation from the government cascades through UKRI and then into the various research councils. NERC, EPSRC, ESRC, and so on are the research councils that work with academics on programs and activities for academic-led R&D, whereas Innovate UK focuses more on supporting businesses and supporting programs led by industry. So we, KTN, are part of what is known the Innovate UK family. So you may have come across Enterprise Europe Network if you are looking at trading abroad or working in some European projects, and also the catapults that can be very helpful, among other things, to give you access to state-of-the-art facilities and business development expertise. So we, KTN, are the networking partner of Innovate UK. And something to mention here as well, Paul mentioned this morning the UK CPN, so we also shape and deliver the UK CPN initiative, which I'll talk about a little bit later. So as I said very quickly through this, so our mission is to deliver economic growth, and we do that by helping you making connections. Although we primarily focus on helping businesses, we also work with academics, founders, NGOs, and many other organizations, as we recognize we need to bring you together to accelerate innovation and economic growth. KTN as such, legally speaking, we are actually a not-for-profit SME. We are about 200 employees, And one of our maybe selling points, one could say, is that we have expertise and connections across all different sectors, industry sectors, which are of relevance to the UK economy. So Sally, myself, and Brian, we are in the materials team, but we have people across many other different teams, which we can bring into this challenge if needed. So the chemistry team, they have expertise in biotechnology. We also have a manufacturing team, and so on. So many expertise there. Role of the KTN. So on a day-to-day basis, we do many things, which I'm not going to cover here today. You have some information there, and you can find out a little bit more about the wide range of activities that we do in our website. Because what I really want to focus on today, and this next 15 minutes, is actually how we can help you to apply for this funding. So first of all, who is the KTN direct support team? So you've already met Sally Becken. She is the knowledge transfer manager for plastics, polymers, and elastomers. And she is also leading the UK CPN. So Sally has over 20 years experience in the field and an uncountable number of contacts as well. Brian McCarthy, who you met this morning. So Brian is an expert in packaging and also textiles, so providing support here. And then there is myself, so I'm the knowledge transfer manager for circularity and smart functional materials. So all of us directly working on this to help you, and also working to deliver the UK CPN, but more people in hand, as I said. So how we can actually support your application? So I try to make here some sort of a flow chart to try to give you an overview of how we work and what to expect. So you may have come here today with a potential idea, a potential project in mind, trying to work out, is SSPP funding right for me? And hopefully after this morning session, you have a better idea of if potential ideas or projects are within a scope, and we can also help you to answer that question. It may be that the answer is no, and we had a couple of people approaching us in the London briefing event, and that was the outcome of the conversation. But as Nick said, there are other types of funding that potentially we can signpost to you, and we will support you in the same way that we will support anyone applying for SSPP funding. Now, it may be that you came here today, and as the gentleman here in the front, sorry, put you in the spot again, you need contacts. So we can help with that, and I'm going to talk you through many different ways that we can do that. The idea will be to get you to a stage where your contacts become collaborators, potential partners, and you may touch ground with us again, asking for support to actually receive feedback on your application. So we can do that. And just the subtlety here is that the guys, the Innovate UK, UKRI guys, they cannot see your application, they cannot provide actually feedback on the application because they are conflicts of interest. But we, KTN, we are not the founders, and we are the people that you can send the application to for feedback. So, and yeah, you may be already in a position where you already have collaborators as well. Yeah, something that was said before, and I cannot stress enough, is timing. And I do appreciate that some of the deadlines for these competitions are very tight, and that we are all busy people. Sharon shared earlier this slide here with the number of applications as the deadline of an Innovate competition approaches. And this is in red where we, KTN, get usually approached to review applications. The last Smart Round closed the 9th of January, and we were approached to review applications 2 hours before the deadline. I think I don't need to say any more. So the message here is, if you have a half-baked idea, start talking to us today. Because it may be that you need collaborations, and that is very important for a very strong application. So don't wait until you have spent time and resources in building your application and then give it to us again 1-2 days before, because it's very unlikely that we will be able to support you as we can and we want to. So to manage that, we, the KTN team, may give you some deadlines of when is the last time that we want to hear from you if you want some feedback. So we will be as reasonable and as accommodating as we can, but that will also help us manage how many applications there are, and use resources much better again. So just get in touch with us if you want to apply for this. Now, how do we make connections? So things we can do. You may have already in mind an organization, even a person that you want to connect with, and we can make potentially a direct introduction. So that is a way of going around it. Another way, another possibility is actually through the UK Circular Plastic Network. And I'm not going to put in the spot anyone to ask who is not a member of the Circular Plastic Network. I know that most of you are. And if you are not, here is the website. You can, at the bottom of the slide, it takes 2 minutes to sign up. I can do it for you at lunchtime if you really want to. And but probably you want to know what this is about. So the UK CPN, for those of you that do not know, is an initiative actually supported by UKRI and KTN as well. So the idea of this initiative is to bring together the very wide range of users, producers, makers, designers of plastic products, in view to get those communities talking, working together, in view to develop means of reducing the amount of problematic plastic waste entering the environment. So we have many members. Membership is completely free, and it gives you access, among many other things, to many of the free events that we organize. So this is how the website looks like. At the top here, you will see, probably not, a funding tab. So any sort of opportunity around funding in the plastic space that comes to our radar will be there. And if it is not there, please let us know, and we will put it there for everyone to see. So that is something for you to look at. So events to make connections. So this is what is currently in the pipeline. So quite a few things here relevant to SSPP. Business breakfast. I know that some of you in the audience did attend the one in Manchester back in September. We still have 5 more to run until March. So there is a lot of packaging community coming to this business breakfast. So the next one is in Belfast, and after that I cannot really remember where we will be. But there are more here in the UK. I'm going to point this out simply because Michael asked earlier about potential further funding and so on. So in here, there is a questionnaire open now where we are trying to gather further data to inform future funding calls and then reshape or shape the UK CPN as well. It takes less than 10 minutes to go through that, and we'll ask questions about what are the challenges you are facing, do you have any innovation solution that the community should know about, so all of that will be there. We will not need you to put your personal details. The only thing we will be asking for is the sector in which you are working and a couple of details about the size of the organization for us to have some background data. But if you're well, I will ask everyone, and particularly the businesses in the room, to please fill that document if you want to have your say. In terms of, I lost it? Activities, sorry, venues to make connections. So 2 things to mention here. We organize many events, but we are also at many events. So we will be at Packaging Innovations at the NEC at the end of February. And what we do there, we'll have a stand very similar to this, and this is an opportunity for those innovators and startups in the room to actually exhibit there for free. And these exhibitors can be quite expensive sometimes, so opportunity here. If you want to know more about packaging innovations, please contact Sally, who is leading on this. So there is a call at the moment in our website seeking for startups that would like to exhibit there. So opportunity to make connections and opportunity to shine light on you and raise your visibility among quite a lot of people in that event. The other one I'm going to mention is the Materials Research Exchange and Innovators and Funding Conference. So this is a 2-day conference. It's open to both academics and industry. Will take place in London the 19th and 20th of February. This is not a trade event. It's an innovation R&D showcasing event, particularly focused on materials and materials research. Obviously, that means materials processing, equipment or innovative equipment that could help or is relevant to this area as well. The plastics is going to be very a key theme in the conference. So this is the day 2 of the program for day 2 of that event. As you can see, there are 4 different parallel sessions happening, plus an investment pitching session as well. And one of them, the whole day, will be dedicated to plastics. And plastic packaging will play a key role there. The SSPP team will be there. We will all be there as well. And we are trying, at the moment, we're shaping a session and some activities to facilitate the networking of those there. So if you are not registered yet and you would like to attend, there are some details here on how to do that. There are still some spaces available for exhibitors, and there are some special deals for SMEs. So if you are interested, again, get in touch and we can provide you more information. So that's his MRE. And this doesn't shout plastics, but I wanted to bring this up as a potential way of you to look for collaborations as well. So we at KTN developed this sort of strategic landscape mapping exercising. There is not one for plastics and circular plastics as yet. We are actually working on that. But there is one about process manufacturing. These tools are very interactive. This obviously I cannot click here, but this will give you like an overview of, in this case, any processing manufacturing stakeholders in that space in the UK. So you can go into any of these. So for example, for your projects, you may be looking for manufacturers, and you can use tags to filter this information. And in there, you can actually find names of academics and companies that potentially you would be interested to get in touch with. And then you can try to approach them yourselves, or come to us and we can potentially make an introduction there. So another different ways of making connections. So that's all for connections. And the other thing I wanted to talk about are actually tools that can help you to put together a very good, outstanding proposal. So the first one is known as the Good Application Guide. So this was developed by KTN in collaboration with Innovate UK. This is a short guide which is not aimed to substitute all the information that is in the UKRI website about how to apply for this particular funding, but to supplement that. So here, this is particularly useful to look for tips on how a good application could look like. So applicable to any Innovate UK grants, but also applicable to many other proposals. The only thing to say here is that those 2 extra questions that were mentioned by Nick, Q3 and Q4, there is no info here. So for that, you really need to go to the UKRI website. By the way, I haven't said, all these tools are completely free and are available online, so you can download all of these. Another one is the Innovation Canvas, again, completely free in our website. So this tool can be used in many different ways. It can also be used for writing applications. People find it very helpful to actually structure thinking and to challenge assumptions. So you see here is the canvas is structured in 3 different sections with subsections here. And in there, if you go into the website, what you will find is different questions to prompt your thinking about how do we know what the market is, how do we go about finding about the market, how confident we are that we know what the market is. You can score yourself there, all this, as I said, interactive tool, and that can give you an idea of what are the strengths and importantly, where are the weaknesses in your potential proposal as well. So it can help you to develop further that value proposition. So something for you to look at. And because this is a very strong sustainability call as well, I thought that I'll point out two tools here as well, which can be of relevance. One is called the Horizon Toolkit. And this was developed, again, in collaboration with Innovate UK, primarily when shaping competitions and strategic programs, to make sure that such competitions and programs, the conversations about how a sustainable economy look like and consideration about the environment and social impacts are part of the conversation. So this is about a 70-page document that will take you through different environmental, social, and economic factors that have been identified as key for a sustainable economy. So again, not all of these may be applicable for you, but can help, particularly in applications when thinking about those wider impacts and thinking about as well risks, for example, because in applications I tend to see a lot of technical risks, but what about environmental risks? What about social risks as well? Changes in legislation and so on. So there will be a lot of primers there for you to stimulate your thinking. And the last one, and I love this one. So this is also to stimulate your thinking, but in a much more fun manner, or at least to me. So this is a toolkit. It's called the 30 Ideas to Kickstart Your Circular Business, and it actually looks like this. Online, you'll have a PDF version of all of this. And what you've got here is just a little bit of information about what is the circular economy and a series of cards. Each of these cards will be color-coded, and we'll have some questions. So you'll have questions about how to stimulate a product innovation, business model innovation, and system change innovation as well. So again, you can use this as little or as much as you can, as you want. How these cards look like? So just to give you an example, so it's an example of, what are the blue ones? System change innovation. So this will have questions such as, and I cherry-picked this one for today, what if you design your product to fit recycling systems? And in there, you will have a few more primers to make you think about, well, how this could be done. And the beauty of this is that you also have an example of a real business that has a product or a service that fulfills that what if. So in this case, it's an example of a company that has developed these desks, this bit of furniture, which are made of one single material, corrugated cardboard. There is no screws, no glues, no tools needed. They come already in modules to be assembled, and according to this, it takes less than 5 minutes to assemble that. So in a busy life, quite a USP as well. So another example here, what if you sold outcomes rather than products? And have another example. I didn't realize that we were being recorded, but I'm gonna take a risk here. So anyone familiar with this picture? Recognize this picture at all? Have you been there? No? I don't know if that is a relief or, right. So I live about 20 minutes from here in a very nice suburb in the south of Manchester called Chilton. And I hope I'm not gonna, anyone from Chilton? Right. So I live there. I think Michael knows where I'm coming from. So people in Chilton, I'm gonna be super stereotypical now, they proud themselves as eco-warriors, right? And we have this Facebook page, it's called Reduce, Recycle. And there are many strict rules to how you can be a member or not a member there. Anyway, so yeah, eco-warriors. In addition of that, people in Chilton love cats as well. I've got 3, I must confess. So this is the bath of one of my neighbors, which is filled with cat food pouches. Now, the reason for that is because these eco-warriors, obviously, they want to do something about that, and they don't want those pouches to go to landfill. So all my information comes from the Facebook page, by the way. So they've actually liaised with a local recycling company, which I'm not going to mention, to see what they can do about this. In Chilton as well, the demographic is academics, junior doctors, and professionals. So I don't know if that has something to do with it, but they are starting to make some calculations about how many of these pouches, well, the population of cats in Chilton, how many of these pouches are being actually produced, and how many are going to potentially to landfill. All this is real. They took that further, and they've now connected with another neighborhood or suburb of the south of Manchester, namely West Disbury, to try to forecast how the problem and of this, all this to go back to the local council to try to do something about it. They have to kind of go back to the calculations because in West Disbury they are more dog lovers and cat lovers, but they are still working on that. So true story there. So what if you could use your neighbor's waste? So if you are interested, you are working and you need raw material coming from these PET vouchers, I can certainly make an introduction to my neighbors. And with that, I'm not going to go through this. I'm going to hand it over to Sarah. So just KTN people is there. Come and talk to us later. And if you don't have the time today, please get in touch as soon as possible about your proposals. And with that, I hand it over to Sarah.
Wonderful. Thank you, Veronica, and to all of the speakers who preceded me. So this morning, is it still this morning? No, we've drifted into this afternoon. That's okay. This afternoon, just before lunch, I will be talking you through the Enabling Research call as part of the Smart Sustainable Plastic Packaging Challenge, which opened on Monday. So my name is Sarah Banning. I'm from UKRI. And as I said, the Enabling Research call, this opened on Monday, and this is going to be for a number of grants for academic-led research and development. And we'll be looking for grants that span the whole, we'll be looking to fund research that spans the whole plastic packaging supply chain. So, as we've heard already, plastics, they've been around for a while. If you think about cling film, if you think about Tupperware, we also plastic pouches. We now appear to have a pouch problem, whether it's for our pets or for our rice. Plastics are ubiquitous and durable. Their success is just incredible. The benefits that plastics bring, whether it's healthcare, food, medicine, they are numerous. However, the success of plastics are also starting to provide some fairly significant consequences. Plastics are now so ingrained in everyday life and our economy that they're also becoming ingrained in our land, our soils, and our seas as well. However, the purpose of the Enabling Research Challenge is to really start to address some of these challenges that we see with plastic packaging. So we've mentioned already, they are used throughout the whole of society, whether it's medicinal products, food, cleaning products, and typically after a very short lifespan, a very short first use, they either end up in landfill, although, however, Paul did say earlier, unfortunately, more than 30% of plastic packaging doesn't even make it to landfill. It is leaked into our environment. However, we see real opportunities to change our thinking and start to make the plastic packaging supply chain much smarter and much more circular. So we are looking to fund projects that are potentially researching new materials, novel materials. We're looking at potential solutions around design. Can we design products with recycling in mind? Can we design products for reuse? Can we potentially start designing products that can go into other parts of the plastic packaging value chain and really start to get our thinking around a circular approach to a plastics packaging value chain? So the aim of the Enabling Research workstream, we want to support research that addresses widely understood problems in relation to plastic packaging. There's a lot that we don't know. We don't know how plastics behave in the environment. We don't know how different types of plastics behave in the environment. From a social science point of view, we don't know how consumers make their decisions about the products that they buy. We also don't really know how they make their decisions about how they use those products and how they dispose of them. And from a business point of view, what are kind of the new business models that are going to emerge that will drive a more circular approach to plastic packaging? And how do we get to the economics that will actually make these new business models viable at scale? It's all very well and good sort of having a fairly small scale reuse or return in a local plastic-free shop. They are fantastic, but equally, how do we make this work in global markets? So this is the aim of the Enabling Research workstream. We want to find solutions that will unlock existing barriers to the fundamental systems change, some of that systems change that we heard about earlier in relation to the plastic pack targets. And we have a number of objectives that are specifically relevant to the enabling research workstream that will support the wider objectives of the Smart Sustainable Plastic Packaging Programme. So really these are framed around the need to tackle the challenge of plastic pollution in the environment. We want to be driving research and innovation and developing a much more integrated circular plastic packaging supply chain. But really importantly, research projects need to demonstrate their contribution to supporting the plastic pack targets. So what we're looking for from projects. As I've mentioned, there's a lot we don't know. So they need to be problem-led, addressing widely understood issues, potentially issues that industry is currently grappling with. And you might think that you have the solution for those challenges. So these are problems associated with plastic packaging, typically for consumer products, so maybe within the food industry, household, cosmetics, and medical products as well. Research needs to be framed in terms of its impact on its context within activities and environmental consequences, and potentially drawing upon expertise from across multiple academic disciplines, and also potentially working with other collaborative partners, maybe from industry, maybe other government bodies, or maybe non-governmental organisations and charities as well. So I've said potentially when it comes to spanning multiple academic disciplines, but also with project partners as well. Those are encouraged where it's relevant to the research. So it's not mandated. However, it is, if it's going to really add value to the project, and in terms of looking at the whole supply chain approach, then it may really add value to your research. And as I've said, projects need to consider the implications and outcomes for relevant actors across the plastics supply chain. So you've heard earlier that with regards to the feasibility studies and industrial research, there are 4 key themes. Within the enabling research, we've actually expanded that out a little bit to include a focus on behavioural insights, both from consumers and business, but also really looking at business and economic models. What are the changes that need to happen to economic policy? What interventions are needed from government to really enable the shifts to the supply chain? However, other research themes not listed here may also be considered, as long as they will enhance integration and collaboration across the supply chain. So these are a list of indicative research themes. And we're also conscious that projects may span 2, 3, all of them. So please don't feel limited by these. And if you have questions around whether a proposal is going to be relevant for enabling research, please just come and ask myself or anyone else from the team. So some more specifics now about the funding available. So UKRI intends to fund a balanced portfolio of projects across the supply chain. We have up to £8 million to invest in projects, and we anticipate funding up to 10 projects, but it will obviously depend on the proposals that we receive. Projects are likely to last between 18 and 36 months. However, if the project is going to be lasting 36 months, it does need to start from the 1st of November, as all funds need to be spent by the end of the challenge, which is March 2024. In terms of eligibility, there is some really clear criteria around the types of organisations that are eligible for this academic-led funding. So the Enabling Research Call is being managed through NERC, the Natural Environment Research Council. So that is a different funding process to what you've heard about already this morning. Anyone from the academic community, you'll be very familiar with applying for grants through this process. If you're from industry and you're looking to be involved as a project partner in some enabling research, then I suggest you get in touch with us to understand more about how your contribution to that project needs to be managed. We do have a lot more information about this eligibility criteria within the call document that has been released on Monday. So if you want to get into much more of that detail, please do access that through that call document. We also have a lot of this information on the NERC website. And again, please contact myself or other members of the team if you've got questions. I want to reiterate that although this call is being managed through NERC, it is a UKRI-wide programme. So we are looking for, and we encourage proposals from academics from any discipline that is supported by UKRI. So the dates, the detail. The outline proposals need to be received by the 17th of March. I will be running a briefing webinar during the first week of February to go through the details of the call again in more detail. Information about that will be available on various websites in the coming weeks. So again, if you've accessed the announcement of opportunity on the NERC website and you have more questions in weeks to come, or you're trying to develop your collaboration partners and want to ask questions about that, please do join that briefing webinar where I'll be able to talk you through that in detail. So there will be a two-stage application process: outline proposals and then projects that are deemed to be acceptable, and we will be inviting to full proposal. That deadline will be the 16th of June. And the assessment process will probably be very familiar to the academics within the room. Outline proposals will be assessed by an independent expert panel. And then full proposals will go through the two-stage process of peer review, and then successful projects will be invited to an interview panel. So the UKRI, as I've mentioned, we intend on funding a balanced portfolio of projects. So if you think about what I've said about the types of projects, we'll be funding some proposals that are 18 months, some that are 36 months, and probably some in between. So we are looking at issuing grants of a range of sizes and duration. So for the outline proposals, your application is very similar to what you'll be familiar with within the academic community. You'll complete the JES form online and then provide your case for support. And in terms of the assessment criteria, you need to demonstrate how your proposal will fit the scheme in terms of meeting the aims and objectives of the SSPP programme. Obviously, at outline proposal stage, that is, I guess, an outline of that work. Secondly, you need to demonstrate the potential for scientific excellence. I'm not going to, go into this in a lot of detail right now, because there is much more detail within the call document that is available online, and I'll also be talking through this information during the briefing webinar during the first week of February. So for full proposals, obviously more information will be required for that. There'll be the JES form, the case for support, and then a number of other documents will need to be attached to your application to explain who will be involved, what their contribution will be, as well as the resources that will be needed, how they will be spent for the work to be undertaken. Letters of support. So these are for project partners only. So if you are collaborating with industry partners, with NGOs or other government bodies, these letters of support are for those project partners only. It's not for the research organisations. And then in terms of assessment criteria, again, the full proposals will need to be providing much more detail about the scientific excellence, demonstrating the originality and quality of the proposed research. Your proposal must really clearly show how your project supports the objectives of the Plastics Pact and how it will deliver systemic change. Similarly, it needs to really clearly explain how you will reduce the UK plastic packaging system's overall environmental impact. So the enabling research, we're really seeking projects that can demonstrate environmental benefits, but also have societal benefits and improve our understanding of economics as well. The fit to scheme, I would say, as I've mentioned earlier, please do include opportunities for collaboration where it's relevant to the research. And also at the, you'll see on the screen here, industry partners may also provide match funding. This might be through in-kind contributions or through cash support as well. And we do encourage industry partners, again, where it's relevant to the project being delivered. So that has been a whistle-stop tour of this enabling research call. As I say, it opened on Monday, so I'm now expecting traffic to the NERC website to spike after this presentation. Information is also available on the other Research Council websites if they are more familiar to you. So we've got a little bit of time now for some questions. However, I will be available this afternoon if you've got a proposal in mind and you want to talk me through that in a bit more detail, just to check whether it will be relevant for this call, then please don't hesitate to come and find me after lunch. So, do we have any questions?
If you could please say who you are in the organization, please. Thanks. Maybe this way.
Hi Sarah, Alex Lord, Silotech. Is there an upper bound on the amount for an individual grant?
No.
That was very succinct, thank you.
Perfect. Next. One question. Could say who you are. Yes.
Hi, Alex Tickham, University of Nottingham. Sorry if I missed this bit. For Innovate UK applications, we're sort of used to the 30% max for research organisations. So for this, is there a concurrent maximum for industry participation?
So for industry participation, you would need to, essentially industry funding that goes alongside an academic proposal, that amount needs to be taken off the grant that the academic institution will be receiving. So I'm going to clarify, so for the enabling research, these are academic-led projects. So the lead institution will need to be an academic institution. So they will submit the proposal. And I'm going to just skip back to a slide where we talk about, so you can see we've got here up to £8 million. That's at 80% of full economic cost. So for the academic institution, they will receive 80% of the full economic cost of the project. So let's say it's a £100,000 project and an industry partner is adding 50k to that. That 50,000 will need to be taken off. Sorry, let's say it's £150,000 in total. An industry partner is bringing 50,000 to that. That 50,000 is taken off the 150,000 total, and then the research organisation will be eligible for 80% of that. Does that make sense?
80% of the 100, so 80% of their full economic cost.
That's right, yeah.
But so there's no maximum proportion of the project that industry can be involved with?
No.
Okay, but is that
yeah.
Sorry, does that mean that there's no
Margaret, please, can I? Thanks. Thank you.
So just to clarify on that, if you're having Margaret Bates, University of Northampton, if you're having an academic-led enabling research project and you've got a partner who's an SME who needs money to complete their part, what's the intervention with them?
Nick.
Zero.
Right.
Sorry,
That's what I was trying to clarify.
No money can come through enabling research into the coffers of that business partner. You need to be fully self-funded if your business is.
Thanks, Nick.
You can say who you are.
Kieran O'Shea, Brunel University, London. Can you submit applications
for similar projects across funding streams. So, for example, a university-led application addressing the Enabling Research Scheme and a project that may allow some business funding on one of the other research cores we talked about earlier.
I think Nick wants to answer this.
Thanks, Nick.
Yes. Yeah, you could. But you would need to have very rigorous accounting practices to make sure there was zero danger of the academic partner duplicating or receiving double grant, if that makes sense. You know, and that's the usual suite of evidence factors for the Innovate project, timesheets, claim, you know, all that sort of stuff. All the claims would have to be auditable and so on and so forth.
One more question. Sorry, are there any restrictions if the SMEs are seeking funding elsewhere? So we've got small pots of money from ERDF funding for SMEs to recoup some of the costs with collaborations with universities. Would that be allowed?
Might be another question for Nick. Sorry. Do you want to just? You can just stay.
I will. I'll
just
stay.
stay. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, you know, if an SME wants to participate in an academic funded project, which we're really hoping that they will, likewise, we would hope big companies, all size companies would participate. Where that company gets their money from is from for purposes of this call, their concern. If they've got grant funding from something like the IDRF, but would be in effect non-restricted, as long as they're allowed to use the funding for that purpose, then by all means, go for it. This also provides a cheeky opportunity to flag up something that we didn't mention clearly in this morning's session, and a couple of people have suggested that we clarify this. We went at some length about the match funding rates and the fact that we weren't able to offer state aid maxima, which we normally do. For what it's worth, if you are a business and you do have or can see the opportunity to secure other public funding for a project, that is something that you can consider. I would suggest checking with us at an early stage and checking with the other funder or funders, because the state aid rules stipulate what you can go up to. So if you can only get 40% of your 70% maxima from Innovate, you could potentially get the other 30% from somewhere else, a regional, LEP or other sources of funding. It can be done. Our finance form do allow you to enter in other public funding numbers because of that sort of check that you're complying with the law. That's one where I would really suggest you you get in touch and you ask.